Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Bellwitch record, Future's Shadow Part 1, The Clandestine Gate, which may be the single most unnecessarily long yet extremely cool album title that I will hear all year. After the massive success of 2017's Mirror Reaper, Bellwitch immediately became favorites for modern-day doom metal fans. The Seattle duo's knack for managing to successfully execute extraordinarily long songs with a rare degree of versatility for singular extended compositions immediately shot them to the front of the pack as soon as a wider audience of metalheads managed to get a whiff of their sound, and ever since then, people have been waiting for the next big thing from Bellwitch, rightfully so, considering their discography up to this point has been pretty impeccable. Future Shadow Part 1, The Clandestine Gate, is described by the band as the first part in an intended triptych of long-form albums, and, well, to be totally honest, even the best of the best in the history of doom metal would not be able to pull off something like that without coming across as slightly self-indulgent or pretentious, but against all odds, Bellwitch deliver an excellent first chapter in what is likely to be a fantastic narrative, at least based on the quality of this first third. It genuinely is remarkable how Bellwitch as a project managed to make every single moment of the Clandestine Gate, as well as virtually every other piece of work in their discography up to this point, feel essential, because they really do dabble in some extremely long song lengths. I mean, really, this record alone is a single track, yet still clocks in at nearly an hour and a half in length. That is incredible. That is insane. And for anybody who isn't a diehard post-metal fan, it's probably something that most metalheads are not used to by any regard. And if you aren't a major fan of post-metal, drone metal, or other subgenres of metal that tend to experiment with longer song lengths, chances are you probably aren't the biggest fan of things like that. And as someone who, although a fan of post-metal, is not the biggest supporter of some of those subgenres, this manages to just be executed flawlessly in a way that has no right to be as successful as it is. The two of them managed to make every single moment within the building of the soundscape of the record feel essential to the general musical narrative of the effort as a whole, and as soon as the Clandestine Gate opens up with an 8-minute long instrumental organ piece before progressing into a number of different forms of doom metal, it's immediately obvious that there is this unrelenting sense of atmospheric depth that is rare to come by even in the best doom metal of today. It could certainly be said that some of the drone metal passages here aren't necessarily the most exhilarating compared to when the Clandestine Gate cranks up to a 10 in some of its heaviest, almost death metal-oriented moments, death doom metal-oriented moments, but nonetheless, some of the more ambient passages here still feel cacophonous in their own right and play an integral role in developing the general atmosphere of the record, as the entire album feels very fluid in nature, something that is a bit of a signature for Bellwitch at this point, and something that defines their incredibly unique and easily enjoyable sound despite the ambitiousness of projects like this. It certainly helps that each half of Bellwitch as a project is absolutely essential, as they manage to deliver work that beautifully complements their corresponding half as musicians. Dylan Desmond's bass work could most accurately be described as thunderous, perhaps, with the manner in which he lets notes hang as they just slowly bleed into each other, building up pressure throughout the entirety of the Clandestine Gate, really allowing there to be a sort of tension throughout the entirety of the record, no matter what passage you are really at, no matter what subgenre they are experimenting with. The entire album just feels a bit more intense because of his bass work, which is nice to see considering metal as a genre, even heavy subgenres like doom metal, aren't necessarily known for their incredibly impressive or even essential bass work, but really despite the fact that Desmond's bass work is put in the back due to the fact that he is by definition a rhythmic instrument, he feels at the forefront at the same time in regards to the importance of the role that he plays in developing the overall sludginess and heaviness of the record. On the other hand, Jesse Schreibman's contributions as a drummer are virtually invaluable as well, with his performance being incredibly devastating and a bit of a mixture between furious yet grounded, as if he's drumming for the soundtrack to the climax of the most unnerving psychological horror film that you've seen in your entire life. And that's saying a lot, because really this is a record that requires a degree of firmness, a sort of heaviness in terms of drumming to really succeed instrumentally, and he goes light years beyond what is required. Although I don't often like to use the term synergy very often, just because it's kind of a cringeworthy term that's mainly used by how do you do fellow kids kind of CEO multimillionaire types, I feel like this is one of the few times where I can actually say that two musicians have a sort of synergy together. Really, Desmond and Schreibman have a bit of a passionate back and forth in terms of their own instrumentation, yet at the same time, their performances almost melt together a bit to create this cacophonous sound, this devastating, cataclysmic atmosphere. It feels genuinely apocalyptic at times, and despite the fact that I'm adding all of these adjectives to describe the atmosphere, the best way that I can describe it is really just massive. And that's largely because of the fact that you have two incredibly talented musicians willing to take their performances to the heaviest possible level at the same time, pushing themselves and pushing the boundaries of their version of doom metal as a whole. I digress. The fact that they're able to create a funeral doom metal record that's just as mournful sounding as it is somewhat chaotic is ridiculously impressive, something that should go without saying if you've actually heard this record, and it seems to imply very, very great things for any future follow-ups to the Clandestine Gate. Lastly, Billy Anderson's production, mixing, engineering, and the variety of different behind-the-scenes roles that he played should not be going unmentioned either. Throughout the Clandestine Gate, there is a perfect balance between these dense, heavy walls of noise and more free-flowing instrumentation. This ranges from the growled vocals shared by both members of the band to these sort of melancholic guitar passages that are found throughout the more chill, laid-back moments of the record, including the final moments of the album that wrap up the entire record, the entire atmosphere of the album as we know it. There is just a variety of different sounds here, a wide sonic palette, if you will, and each aspect of it manages to shine through greatly thanks to the fact that there is a total lack of unintentional muddiness found throughout. Put simply, the heavy moments sound heavy in the perfect way, the softer moments sound soft in the right way, and they manage to complement each other perfectly while still having their own identities as separate sections of the album, and considering this is such a long singular piece, that is something that could have easily gone missed, something that could have caused the record to be weighed down a bit, if you will. It's something that could have genuinely ruined the listening experience. Moments that felt too heavy to be soft or meaningful in any way, or heavy moments that felt too thin or light to feel particularly striking. Every single moment of this record feels like it's produced in the way that is most accurate to what it's trying to get across, and in turn, the emotional value of the record is really dialed up to an 11. Anderson, who has worked with doom and sludge metal icons such as Sleep and Neurosis, among many, many others, is really largely to thank for this. Not to say that the performance work has nothing to do with it, but his behind-the-scenes work stems from a place of experience that few other behind-the-scenes people in underground/alternative metal can really claim to have, as he's worked with some of the greats and is now potentially working with one of the future greats in the form of Bellwitch. Mastering from Justin Wise, whose own behind-the-scenes musical background ranges from indie, folksy singer-songwriters to just straight-up grindcore and power violence, is another aspect of the record that feels undeniably important, as it helps fill out the rest of this atmosphere that largely defines the Clandestine Gate and how it manages to succeed as such an ambitious project. The Clandestine Gate is everything that quote-unquote funeral doom metal should ultimately be in the end. This record has a huge sense of tonal versatility while all the same being a bit overwhelming in terms of emotional devastation. A record that feels just as important from an emotional and in a general internal standpoint than it does a more musical and a more heaviness-related standpoint. Even a lifelong metalhead could barely count on two hands the number of currently active doom metal bands, creating something as emotionally striking as Bellwitch are currently capable of creating, and that's saying a lot, because doom metal, despite all of the stereotypes that surround metal in general, is one of the most emotional and downright powerful subgenres of metal there are. So to say that Bellwitch are really at the top of their game when there are so many other great doom metal bands, past and present, out there waiting to be explored by both amateurs and veterans of the genre alike, is a pretty huge compliment in my eyes. Doom metal in the 80s was defined by Candlemass. In the 90s, it was defined by Sleep, arguably, and in the 2000s, it was perhaps most heavily defined by Electric Wizard. But the 2010s really didn't see the rise of a singular hero of doom metal, a band that really represented doom metal at large for a wider metal community representation. There were some major albums here and there, but as a whole, similar to other metal subgenres like thrash metal, there simply wasn't a singular band that really marched forward as the leader of the pack and really defined a subgenre for a new decade of listeners. And although Bellwitch did first rise at the end of the 2010s, their latest studio album, The Clandestine Gate, proves that they may very well be contenders as new legends of the subgenre for a new decade entirely. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. I have been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.